1984's Decoder is a quasi-punk experimental arthouse film that came from nowhere, existed briefly on the radar, and then disappeared into the ether almost as quickly. Frankly, had Vinegar Syndrome not released this back in 2019, I don't think I'd have been able to so much as stumble on it. It's the kind of movie that just sort of fell through the cracks. It gets brought up occasionally in academic papers and books, but before the VS release, well, it was kind of a hard film to find. It had a VHS release which fell out of print relatively quickly, then a DVD release which also dropped out of print and quickly became extortionate, and that's just in Europe. As far as I'm aware, apart from a long out-of-print VHS release, this thing hadn't seen the light of day in the States for the best part of 35 years. This is a bit of a weird one in honesty, and its production history is almost as bizarre as the film itself. It was directed and partly written by Jürgen Muschelek, known more widely as Musche for short. The guy has 2 writing and directing credits, this film and a picture called Humanis Toten. Decoder would be his last picture, and Humanis, by all accounts, was a fairly low-budget affair. Why am I raising this now? Because with Decoder, Musche somehow managed to assemble a frankly astounding list of cast and musicians, mostly in their prime at the time of filming, including the likes of William S. Burroughs, Genesis P-Orridge, Soft Cell, and The. There doesn't really seem to be any documentation as to exactly how all of these musicians and Burroughs ended up meeting Musche, let alone how Musche was able to rope them into being in this, at best, modestly budgeted picture, but somehow he managed to do it. Decoder is set in an alternative, not too distant future, relative to its 1984 release, where a shady, possibly government-run operation is in place monitoring and controlling the public. Initially, we're introduced to this world via Jaeger, a senior investigator or agent who's been rather recently quite out of sorts over his place in the world and his job requirements. His partner recommends a vacation, but he dismisses the idea. He's a dedicated hard worker, a shark in that sense. After that, we're introduced to FM and Christina. They're sort of in a hot-cold relationship. When they're on, they're your typical couple, but when they're off, well, they quite awfully fall out. Christina works as a peep show window girl and trains frogs to kill people in her spare time. So, typical life of an 80s girl. However, today's different. She goes to work, and while she's performing, we're shown that one of her customers is Jaeger, who becomes utterly captivated by Christina. Something about her reflects light and releases something from deep inside him. He needs to meet her. He leaves the show and goes about his business, but he just can't shake Christina from his mind. So he goes back, only to find that she's left for the day. He makes it a goal to meet her in person at some point as soon as possible. Meanwhile, FM's involvement in all of this slowly begins to manifest. At the start of the film, he's unemployed and spends most of his time playing around with recording and manipulating sound to create quite heavy industrial-sounding compositions. At some point, he realises that with the right pitches, balances and tempos, he can manipulate people into behaving a particular way with his compositions. This curiosity is only further amplified when he applies for a position at a local burger shop called H Burger and sees the staff being fearfully protective over a cassette tape. They seem to have 2, one that's kept under lock and key that can deter unwanted behaviour, and one that plays archetypical 50s and 60s style easy listening music that appears to have a calming effect on the patrons of the restaurant. FM gets the job and splits his time working at the burger place and working on the creation and compositions so that he can counter the effects of H Burger's calming music. All the while, both himself and Christina begin to have ever more surreal and unsettling dreams. When FM stumbles on a group of pirates, for lack of a better word, creating powerful industrial sounds within an abandoned and largely on fire warehouse, he sneaks in to record some of it to sample in his own work, only to be captured, brainwashed and somewhat debilitated by the pirates who believed he was working for the shady organisation that Jaeger works for. When FM reveals his real motives to the High Priest of the Pirates, they not only let him go, but agree to support him should he find a way to counterbalance the organisation's musical assault. Meanwhile, Jaeger finally manages to meet Christina and he tells her about a dream he's had in the hope that Christina is able to decipher what he saw. She is able to help to a point, but has to cut things short as it isn't really the time or place for that kind of thing. So Jaeger suggests they meet up again after work and Christina reluctantly agrees. She returns home and a fight between her and FM breaks out. This fight lasts over multiple days, and when Christina follows FM back to his recording studio to try and rectify things, FM is seriously pissed off and demands she leave. She does, but she leaves one of her assassin frogs behind. FM does what any normal human being would do and squeezes the frog a bit too hard, causing it to scream. He then, for some reason, decides the best thing he could do in this situation is squeeze the frog and record its scream, and after some tweaking and sound augmentation, he arrives at a composition that's truly deadly, reducing the listener to either a frightened wreck or an ultra-violent rioter. Naturally, FM, unaware of the consequences of hearing this, causes him to completely freak out and mash the frog into his face. But once the recording finishes, he dubs it onto a cassette tape, makes multiple copies, and takes to the streets, targeting hamburger shops specifically with the help of the pirates. News quickly reaches the organisation that there are riots in the streets and that someone has managed to find a way to weaponise sound against their own compositions, and Jaeger is put on the case. With only a picture of FM to hand, the multiple plot threads quickly begin to come together. As Jaeger hunts FM and tries to meet Christina, Christina tries to search for FM amongst the chaos of the riots, and FM tries to avoid being captured by Jaeger whilst also looking for Christina in order to keep her safe, with the riots growing ever more increasingly violent and Jaeger hot on the case to kill FM. Will the pirates have their day and take back control of the future? Or will Jaeger take out FM and finally find solace in his thoughts? There's only one way to find out, and I highly suggest you do. I should stress that if you're coming to Decoder for a meaty and involved plot, then you might be disappointed. A lot of the merits of Decoder lie not in what's said, but rather what's shown. There isn't really a tremendous amount of dialogue here, and what dialogue is present is generally quite cryptic or riddled with double meanings. The film instead prefers to tell its story more through sound and vision than anything else. It's heavily reliant on its colour palettes to help not only in setting the tone and mood of the film, but also the characters, their personalities, and how they're thinking and feeling. Jaeger, for example, is almost always entirely bathed in blue, which makes sense as most of the city is often bathed in blue or bluish-purple colours as a way of illustrating the government organisation's iron-fisted control over the city and its civilians. Jaeger's main drive in life is his work and dedication to maintaining the status quo. It's an all-consuming force that drives him to keep going in spite of his colleagues telling him he needs to take a break. Hence his dedication to the government makes him blue. Christina is often seen in green or red. Green is used to symbolise her downtime and her love of nature and the natural in general. She's often seen bathed in it when relaxing or taking time to look after her frogs. It's her resting colour in this film. And it contrasts quite nicely with her day job in which she's seen bathed in red, which is used here to instigate both a seediness, a passion, and a touch of degradation. FM is often shown bathed in a purplish blue light, and using our key for reference, blue and red making purple, it could be implied that FM as a character is simultaneously feeling under the thumb of the state while also feeling degraded for his place in this life. This actually becomes especially interesting as the film progresses because white or natural light here is quite frequently used as a representation of humanity or the human factor, the idea of human compassion or kindness. And as the film progresses, we see our characters slowly change colour. FM slowly transitions to a paler and paler blue until by the riots when he's not in the heart of the city anymore and he pretty much becomes a natural colour again. Christina gets a brief flash of natural light in the club when Jaeger sees her. Maybe it's a moment where she sees him clearly worn down and thinks she can be of help. Maybe it's Jaeger seeing Christina in a white light as a person he thinks he needs to reach out to in order to better understand himself. It's the joy of these art house films that all of these things are open to interpretation. What I'm saying now could be absolute bollocks, or it could be exactly what the filmmaker is actually talking about. I work within my own readings, and I encourage you to do so too, as is the nature of experimental and art house cinema. There can be hard and fast interpretations, but realistically, like an abstract painting, as long as it reads right in your head, it's usually all cool. As a final note on the plot, what I can say is that while most descriptions of this film pretty much start with FM working at a burger place and then go from there, that pretty much doesn't happen until about halfway through the film. If I had to rate the consistency of this movie's 3 acts, I'd say the first act is quite a bit slower than I personally would have liked, the second act's about right, and the third act's a little too quick. Indeed, the last 5 to 10 minutes of this film, when everything's coming to a head, left me feeling like I'd hit fast forward. So much is said and done, and not said and metaphorically done in those closing few minutes, that it made me wonder why they spent so much time setting up the first act in such a painfully slow way, when that time could have been moved into the final act to aid the consistency a bit more. This film actually had 4 writers. Musher, as mentioned before, had his part in this, but we also have Klaus Make, who's predominantly a producer, but he does have 4 writing credits. This film and 3 documentaries, none of which are really all that well known. There was also Trini Trimpop, who has 3 writing credits, again Decoder is probably the best known of those, and Volker Schaefer, who moved into production and art design. This is his only writing credit. Though his biggest credit is probably that he did some art design for 2001's Amélie. Together, well, it's quite difficult to say whose work influenced what in this movie, but the resulting script was certainly very defining of 80s counterculture of the time. Luckily, a lot of this film is distinctly show don't tell, and in the direction we find a very solid pair of hands manning the helm. Street shots and any scenes that take place in government-owned buildings are very cold, utilitarian, and quite often have a very distinct and weathered industrial vibe about them that really let you immerse yourself in this semi-dystopian vision. Contrasting these elements, though, are the shots involving nature or more neutral outdoor spaces that are often shot with a much more human presence in mind. There's a slightly larger emphasis than normal on close-ups, facial reactions, and the physical body and nature over the surrounding locations in these scenes. And it really helps a viewer to not only more subliminally understand the tone or vibe that a character's entering, but it also helps us better understand characters' emotions and offers a greater insight into their mindset. It's incredibly important to say that the colour and direction in this film work in tandem to set up a universe that kinda gave me reminiscent pangings back to 1982's Liquid Sky. That's not to say this is a derivative work in any way, shape or form, it's a good thing. But while I don't think it personally looks as gorgeous, I think it stands on its own 2 feet as an 80s art house film that has a very distinguished appearance, which I for one can definitely commend. The Cine 2 is pretty consistently good. They really push the boat out in terms of shot variety in order to help really influence the tone of this picture. The shot that always sticks in my mind is near the beginning when Jaeger walks into work. It's a series of extended tracking shots that follow him through winding corridors of the government offices, and it's just wonderfully handled. It's all more or less shot as a mid-wide and it just screams clinical. It's the perfect way to open the film because it says so much about the character, his situation, and the world this film inhabits, literally without saying a word. It has a real precision to it, which when married up to some near frame-perfect editing, results in a film that, if you have a thing for totalitarian and minimalist art, will be 24-karat fried gold to you. If the visuals don't get you, then the soundtrack definitely will. This is wall-to-wall industrial experimental compositions and 80s electropop. It has a very heavy sound to it, but then a majority of people who worked on the soundtrack for this came out of the industrial and punk scene. And honestly, I think this is one of the best experimental soundtracks I've heard in a very long time. It's perfect for the film, and I think it's one I'd really love to hear isolated. I'm not massively into industrial sounding music, or rather I'm very selective in what I like and what I don't. But here, barring the music used to incite the riots, which features a piercing screech, most of it I could pretty solidly get behind. Finally, performance-wise, well, it's mixed. As there's minimal dialogue, a lot of this film's performances rely on physical acting. I mean, more broadly, it's almost as if these characters are set dressing to a wider narrative, but I can only judge what I can see and use my subjective opinion to give my 10 cents. Jaeger, played by William Royce, is fantastic. His haunted and tired look throughout this entire film is a performance I doubt I'll forget in a hurry. Quite frankly, he's astounding, and I genuinely missed that in the second act he disappeared more or less for a massive amount of the runtime. Christina, played by Christiana Flescherenau, apologies for the name butchering there again, also has her moments. While I can't say she's consistently great throughout, most of her performances a little stony-faced, those few moments where sparks of humanity strike through her are genuinely electric moments that I found really enjoyable to watch. Generally, when I get a proper experimental film on this show, I like to try and explain my interpretation of the film. Part of the fun in watching these is analysing its elements in order to gain a broader understanding of exactly what the film's really trying to say beyond its surface level showings. For Decoder, I think this film's a comment on society's resistance to change, or rather its complacency in maintaining the status quo over fear of development. Here, we see shady organisations attempting to maintain their place at the top of society by attempting to control the proletariat via coded audio and media management. In that sense, Jaeger is the perfect representation of the old guard, as his character literally is that. FM is a representation of the youth, constantly pushing for development and always bringing with them a new wave and a new sound that has a new outlook on the planet. This film was born of punk origins, and at the time, punks were despised by the establishment as unruly and uncontrollable. FM here is literally the coming storm. Both he and the pirates represent that drastic change, with Christina caught in the middle as the human element stuck between the old guard and her existence as an objectified form of titillation, fodder essentially, and the new order that seems aggressive, scary and uncertain. There's a saying that you can cut down all the flowers but you can't stop spring from coming, and I think that sums this movie's message up succinctly. Change is an inevitable part of life, for better or worse. It's how you choose to accept that change which ultimately dictates how well you're likely to fare. And this film leaves things nice and open for you as the viewer to make your mind up as to ultimately how invested or against the idea of change you really are, which I think is a really nice touch. Decoder is a unique viewing experience. It's basically pre-90s industrial incarnate. It doesn't have the dirtiness that industrial film and music would eventually end up as, but it does have many, many elements that are well on their way to getting there. It's stylish, well-directed, well-shot and scored, and while the plot may not immediately jump out at you, what I can say is this isn't your standard popcorn fluff film. I truly believe it communicates itself to the viewer in a way that I've rarely seen in cinema before. The colours, direction, cine, music and physical performances all weave so seamlessly into one another it creates a film that's almost telepathic, for lack of a better word, in its ability to project a narrative into your head with as little literal development on screen as possible. It's impressive. It's a quite astounding achievement, even if it isn't necessarily something you'd want to watch every single day. Unfortunately, Musher would pass away in 2003 at the age of 52 after ending his own life. He never made another film again. A truly tragic set of circumstances. A lost masterpiece. Go and check it out.